All right, Cave Cubs, welcome to lesson number 3, Building Body Paragraphs. Last time we were together live, we completed questions 1 through 4 on building body paragraphs, talking about the structure of an essay. And today we're going to focus on those body paragraphs. Okay, so by the end of the lesson today, we should be finishing questions 5 and 6, and as we do that, we're building our body paragraphs for our essay about character development and the Tiger Rising. So as you notice, for this essay, we're going to write 2 body paragraphs. Let's talk about how we structure that. Now, remember, this resource is available to you in the module, so you can always go back through these slides and you could watch the videos as well. All right, so we're going to build 2 body paragraphs, like I said, to support our thesis.
The body.
Okay, so body paragraphs. If your essay's about a character's development or growth throughout the story, what would be the 2 main supporting ideas, right? So remember in the video, they talked about how body paragraphs are kind of like a stool, okay? It's got to have a solid foundation. So if I'm thinking about the fact that the top of the stool is my thesis, or the growth, in my case, I was writing about Rob's dad, Robert. So the growth of Robert, let's say that's my thesis, that Robert grows, right? So then I got to think about how each of my body paragraphs should be supporting this idea, right? So my first one might be explaining the trait at the beginning of the book, or how does the character begin, okay? And then obviously the next step would be to compare that or contrast that to what the character's like at the end. And now when we're talking about the end, I'm really talking about chapters 28, 29, and 30. Okay, now we probably somewhere within this need to talk about what caused that change to Robert as well. Okay, so in the course of this essay, I really need to prove that Robert is dynamic. Okay, or in your case, it could be Rob or Sistine, that they're dynamic, that he developed, he grew, or changed in some way. So how do I find evidence to support that? Because that's a really important piece here. I want to show that Robert was like at the beginning. Okay, remember that's my first body paragraph. Okay, I know that Robert didn't deal with his feelings. That's what I'm going to prove in the first body paragraph. So how do I know that? How do I know that he didn't deal with his feelings? What happens in the story that shows this? There's so many questions. Could it be when, what pops into my head is when Rob gets slapped by his dad, because I know they were talking about feelings at that point, or maybe even when he whistles the song, when Robert's dad is walking along and whistling the song. That could be. And for some of you, you're going to find multiple pieces of evidence, okay? But either way, I need to go back and find where in the story does it say this, okay? So could be in chapter 1, but I need to search the text, okay? So I can go to the home page and I can click here on the Tiger Rising to find the resources. This is a good starting point. Okay, so I'm ready to start searching for some evidence. Now I have in my mind that I'm going to try to find the part where Rob's dad shows that he doesn't want to deal with his emotions. I think that's probably in chapter 1. So what I'm going to do is go to the home page. I'm going to click on Tiger Rising Resources down here. And all the chapters are laid out here for me in groups of 5. So I know if I'm finding evidence for my first body paragraph, it's going to be what the character is like at the beginning, right? So that's probably going to be chapters 1 through 10. I think that part about when Robert slapped Rob is probably a good example that at least it's going to show that he doesn't want to deal with feelings. I think that's in chapter 1 because I remember thinking about his mom was one of his not thoughts, and that's what he introduced that in chapter 1. So I'm going to click right here, and that looks pretty small, too small for me. So I'm going to click on it, but then I'm going to also click on this little square, and it's going to make it larger. Okay, and then this is kind of a slow process, but I'm just going to kind of skim through until I find the part where he's talking about the funeral. I think that's where he slapped Rob. He did not think about his mother. Here we go. He hadn't thought about her since the morning of the funeral. The morning he couldn't stop crying. So that's Rob. That's not Rob's dad. Oh, here we go. His father watching him, standing beside him, and started to cry too. Oh, so he is showing his feelings, but they were both dressed up in suits that day. His father's suit was, oh, there ain't no point in crying, his father said afterwards. Crying ain't going to bring her back. Okay, that's what I'm looking for. That shows that Rob's dad doesn't want to deal with his feelings. Now, when I'm finding evidence, it doesn't have to be something the character said. It could be just any of the text. It doesn't have to be something the character said. But in this case, I think this is my best option. There ain't no point in crying. So I'm just going to copy that, and then I'm going to paste it into my notes, or I'm going to paste it straight into my body paragraph. So that's how we find evidence. Now, I'm going to keep track in my mind. I know that was in chapter 1 because that's something I'm going to have to mention in my body paragraph. All right, so hopefully that'll be helpful for you. You can always go back to this as well. Okay, but now that we've found evidence, what do? We need to write the paragraph, right? We're ready for that. Okay, so we're looking at number 5 on your building body paragraphs. Okay, so in number 5, we're going to construct our first body paragraph. Okay, so the topic of this paragraph is, what is the character like at the beginning of the book? So we just found some evidence for that. I want to focus on a trait that will change later in the book. Remember, we always want to use that race strategy, which is first we restate the question. In this case, the question is, what is the character like at the beginning of the book? We're going to answer all parts of that. We're going to cite text evidence to support our answer, and we're going to explain our citation. Okay, remember, you need to give at least one example from the book. Don't forget the page numbers, or in this case, the chapters, and we'll talk a little bit more about how to use a direct quote. So, and also, please don't forget to explain your example. The reader is not a mind reader. All right, so here's my example. If I was going to write my first paragraph, the green lines will show you the R and the A part of race. The C is the citation, and the E is explaining my quote. So in the beginning of the book, Robert Horton keeps his emotions inside and is unwilling to deal with the death of his wife. Here's my evidence. Okay. In the first chapter, he tells his son, so I'm stating the chapter, and then I'm using quotation marks to say I'm borrowing these exact words. He tells his son, there ain't no point in crying. Crying ain't going to bring her back. Then later in chapter 9, he begins whistling a song his wife used to sing. So I did go and find some other evidence, okay? So this part is not borrowed. This is I'm setting up and explaining the quote. Then later in chapter 9, he begins whistling a song his wife used to sing. The text says he must have remembered because he shook his head and cursed softly under his breath. Throughout most of the book, Robert keeps his feelings buried inside. It seems like he doesn't want to face the sadness of losing his wife. So I have restated the question. In other words, what was he like? I've answered the question. He was unwilling to deal with his wife. I'm giving evidence, and I'm explaining that evidence. Okay, so now it's your turn to do number 5. And once you've done that, we're just going to move on to number 6, and we set it up just the same way. We're going to go to the text. We're going to find the evidence to support what my character is like at the end. We can copy and paste that. We can write it down in our notes. But for the last body paragraph, it's going to be mostly about what the character is like at the end of the book, and then possibly even what caused this change, right? So focus on the trait that's going to change later in the book. Remember, what did you talk about in the first paragraph? Now, how does it change? We're going to use race strategy. Just looking at that again, at least one example just like before, and then we explain the example. Okay, now here's what I wrote. At the end of the story, Robert kills the tiger. When he does this, he's forced to deal with his emotions. Throughout the book, Robert teaches his son to keep his feelings in, but when the tiger dies, Rob attacks his dad physically and with words. At this point, Robert knows he needs to tell his son how he feels. Okay, so that took a minute to explain my answer. Okay, that's okay if your R and A in the race strategy is more than one sentence. Okay, now here comes my evidence. In chapter 30, Rob finally opens up when he says, "It's hard for me to talk about your mama." Notice when I borrow the words from the text, I've got my quotation marks. I noted that it was in chapter 30. Okay, I wouldn't ever have believed that I could miss somebody the way I miss her. And there's the end of the quote. This shows how hard it is for him to deal with the sadness. Now I'm explaining that. I'm going to give you another piece of evidence. Later in the chapter, he says, "I'll say it for you. I'll try on account of you." He's finally able to talk about his feelings to his son. Okay, so pretty straightforward. Do your best on these body paragraphs. Always, if you need help, office hours are a great time to do that, or feel free to look back at my examples. By the next time I see you in live class, my hope is that you are finished with your body paragraphs. You may type them in a Google Doc and then paste them into building body paragraphs, or you may just type it straight in there. All right, good luck. It's time to do number 6.